The girl was 7 years old, and she was standing in the rain outside the Calgary Courthouse with a broken umbrella and no shoes that fit properly, and she was the only reason Ellsworth Crane did not get into that car. He had not noticed her at first. That was the thing about Ellsworth Crane. Not a cruel man, not an unkind one, but a man so accustomed to moving through the world without friction that smaller things tended not to register. The polished black Oxfords on the courthouse steps. The three-button charcoal suit that his assistant had pressed the night before. The silver cufflinks that had belonged to his father, who had built Crane Capital from a rented office in a strip mall in Red Deer into one of the largest private equity firms west of Toronto. Ellsworth had grown up watching his father's hands shake slightly whenever those cufflinks were fastened, as though they still carried some of the weight of everything the man had earned. Now Ellsworth wore them on days that mattered. Today was one of those days. He had just won 14 months of litigation, 2 failed mediations. A former business partner named Gordon Fitch, who had quietly moved $43 million through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, while telling Ellsworth they were building something together. The judge had ruled that morning with the kind of clarity that made Ellsworth feel briefly that systems worked the way they were supposed to. He had stood in the corridor afterward and shaken his lawyer's hand and felt something unclench in his chest that he had not realized had been tight for over a year. He was 58 years old. He had survived 2 recessions, a divorce that had cost him more than money, and a heart scare in the spring of 2019 that his cardiologist had described as a significant warning. He was not a man who frightened easily anymore. He walked through the courthouse doors and turned left toward the side lot, where his driver, a quiet man named Beatty, who had worked for him for 11 years, was waiting with the black Infiniti. It was raining in the particular way Calgary sometimes rained in October, not heavily, just relentlessly, as if the sky had decided on something and was going to see it through. The girl was crouched at the base of the concrete planter near the bottom of the steps. She had a broken umbrella, the kind with the bent ribs that meant it collapsed sideways instead of opening properly, and she was holding it over herself at an angle that suggested she was more concerned with effort than result. She wore a raincoat that was too small, the sleeves stopping mid-forearm. Her shoes were runners that had split along the left sole. She was watching something across the lot with the particular focus of a child who has decided to solve a problem. Ellsworth almost walked past her. He stopped because she looked up at him, and when she did, she didn't look frightened or shy. She looked like someone who had been waiting. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady. "Is that your car? The black one?" "Over there by the far corner?" He looked. His car was there, parked where Beatty always parked it, along the fence at the edge of the lot. From this distance, he could see Beatty in the driver's seat, looking at his phone. "It is," Ellsworth said. "There was a man under it," she said, before. "About 20 minutes ago. He was lying on the ground and he had something in his hand, and he put it up underneath, and then he got up and walked away toward the street." Ellsworth stood still for a moment. The rain fell on the shoulders of his charcoal suit. He looked at the girl, who was looking back at him with the patient expression of someone who has said something important and is waiting to see if it lands. "What did this man look like?" he asked. She thought about it seriously. "He had a yellow jacket. One of those ones with the reflective stripe here." She drew a line across her own chest with one finger. "And he had a backpack, dark green, and his hair was short, gray on the sides, and he had a phone holder on his arm, like for running, but he wasn't running." Ellsworth looked at the car again. "He had a limp," the girl added, "on his right side. Not a big one, but a little one. Like his knee bothered him. The specificity of it was what stopped him cold. A child making up a story does not include a knee that bothers someone. A child making up a story says a bad guy and leaves it at that." This girl had cataloged the man the way a careful witness catalogs things, not because she had been taught to, but because she was the kind of person who actually looked. "How long have you been standing here?" he asked. "Since my mum went inside to sort something out. About 45 minutes, maybe. Does your mother know where you are? She told me to wait on the steps." He nodded slowly, still not moving toward the car. "What's your name?" "Beatrix," she said. He said. "I'm Ellsworth. I want you to stay right here for a minute." He took out his phone and called Beatty. Through the rain-blurred window of the Infiniti, he watched his driver startle and bring the phone to his ear. "Don't get out of the car," Ellsworth said. "Don't touch anything. Don't start it. Just stay where you are." There was a pause. "Sir? There may be something wrong with the vehicle. I'm calling the police. Stay inside and keep the doors locked." He hung up and dialed 911. He told them what the girl had told him. The dispatcher's voice shifted in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. A slight quickening, a more careful choice of words. She told him to move away from the lot and not to approach the vehicle. She said officers would be there within 4 minutes. He turned back to Bia. Will you come with me? We'll wait over there, under the overhang where it's dry. She looked at the courthouse doors. My mum's in there. I'll ask one of the officers to go in and find her, he said. But I'd rather you weren't standing here in the open while we figure this out. She considered this with the gravity of a child making a genuine risk assessment. Then she picked up her broken umbrella and stood up and walked with him toward the shelter of the building's main overhang, without further protest. They stood side by side and watched the lot. 3.5 minutes later, 2 police cruisers turned into the entrance without sirens, but with lights. A third vehicle followed, unmarked, dark, moving faster than it needed to. Ellsworth watched a woman in plainclothes approach the Infiniti from an angle, crouched slightly, hand on something at her hip. He watched Beatty get out of the car when they waved him back. He watched the driver walk toward the building with his hands slightly raised in the reflexive way of a man who understands the situation, but is also frightened. Bia stood next to Ellsworth and watched all of it without speaking. Have you seen something like this before? He asked her, meaning the police response, the vehicles, the controlled urgency of the scene in front of them. No, she said, but it looks like the movies except quieter. That was exactly what it looked like. An officer came to them, a young woman named Constable Ashby, who had calm eyes and a notebook that she held the way experienced people hold objects without looking at it. She spoke to Ellsworth first, took his information, then crouched down to V's level in the way that good officers learn to do. Bay, she said, you're the one who saw the man under the car? Yes. Can you tell me about that again? As much as you remember, B told her. Yellow jacket with a reflective stripe, dark green backpack, short gray hair, the phone holder on his arm, the slight limp on the right side. She added something she hadn't mentioned to Ellsworth. The man had been on his phone just before going under the car, and she had seen the screen briefly from where she was sitting on the planter. It was a photo of the black Infiniti, the same car, parked in the same spot. Constable Ashby wrote everything down and looked up with an expression that she kept carefully neutral. You have a very good memory, she said. My mum says I notice too much, B said. The officer almost smiled. In this case, that was exactly the right amount. They went inside, and Constable Ashby radioed someone to locate Bia's mother in the courthouse. Ellsworth stood in the main lobby and watched the lot through the glass doors, where more officers had arrived and the Infiniti was now surrounded by people moving with purpose. Beatty found him after a few minutes, still looking shaken, still in his driver's coat. Mr. Crane, he said, are you all right? Yes, Ellsworth said. Are you? I had the radio on. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. Beatty looked out at the lot, at the car, at the people crouched around it. If you had come out 5 minutes earlier, I know, Ellsworth said. He didn't say the rest out loud, which was, if she hadn't been there. B's mother came down the main staircase 20 minutes later with a police officer beside her and the particular expression of a parent who has been told that their child is safe, but not yet told why that information had needed to be conveyed at all. She was a woman in her early 30s, with the look of someone who had come downtown after a long shift, tired around the eyes, sensible shoes, a bag over one shoulder that was slightly too full. Her name, Ellsworth would learn later, was Miriam. When she saw Bia standing beside Ellsworth in the lobby, she stopped on the last step and made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then she came the rest of the way down quickly and put both hands on B's face and looked at her and then pulled her close. She's fine, the officer said. She's completely fine. She actually... He paused. She helped us quite a bit today. Miriam looked up at Ellsworth over the top of her daughter's head. He didn't know what to say in that moment that wouldn't sound either inadequate or theatrical, so he simply said, she was standing on the steps when I came out. She told me what she saw. I called the police. That's all that happened. Miriam straightened slowly. What did she see? Someone put something under my car, Ellsworth said. The police are investigating now. She processed this. He could see it happening across her face, the pieces arriving and assembling in order. Under your car, she said. Yes. She looked at her daughter. You told him. He walked right past me, Bia said. I had to speak up. Miriam made another sound, not a word again, but different from the first one. They sat in the lobby on the low bench near the information desk while the police continued outside, and Constable Ashby came back to ask Bia several more questions, which Bia answered with the same patient precision she had applied to everything else. Ellsworth bought them both coffee from the machine down the hall. He got a hot chocolate for Bea, who looked at it like it had personally done her a favor, and he sat across from them and tried to be useful in the small practical ways that a man can be useful when there is nothing large left for him to do. He learned things about them while they waited. Miriam was a registered nurse. She worked 3 days a week at a long-term care facility in Bowness and spent the other 2 managing her mother's affairs. Her mother had been diagnosed the previous winter with early-stage dementia and was still living in the house in Inglewood, where Miriam had grown up, with a care aide who came 5 days a week. Today, Miriam had been at the courthouse because of a property dispute. A neighbor had filed a complaint about drainage from the old house, and the city had sent notices, and Miriam had taken a day to come in and speak to someone in the zoning department on the 4th floor. Bia had been told to wait on the steps because the appointment was supposed to take 20 minutes. It had taken 46. She's always like that, Miriam said, meaning the noticing, the remembering. Since she was small, she'll come home from school and tell me what the lunch monitor was wearing and what song was playing on someone's phone at the end of the street and what the weather was like at exactly what time. I've had her tested. She's not on any spectrum. She pays attention. She genuinely pays attention to things. Most people don't, Ellsworth said. No, Miriam said, they don't. He thought about Gordon Fitch, who had paid just enough attention to know how to look like he wasn't stealing. He thought about the $43 million and the shell company and the 14 months of litigation. He thought about the thing that he had not yet told his lawyer, which was that for the first 6 months of those 14 months, he had genuinely believed the mistake might have been his own. That was what Gordon had done. Not just taken the money, but made Ellsworth doubt his own memory of events until the evidence came too overwhelming to question. A man in his late 50s who has built what Ellsworth had built should not be easy to manipulate, and yet. A small girl on the courthouse steps had seen a man she didn't know in a yellow jacket with a reflective stripe, had noticed his knee, had noticed his phone, had noticed the photo on his screen, had cataloged all of it without being asked and without knowing why she was doing it, and then had spoken up when the moment required it. Sometimes the most careful people in a room are the ones who have the least reason to be careful on behalf of anyone else. Constable Ashby returned mid-afternoon. She sat down and spoke to Ellsworth directly, with the composed delivery of someone who has learned to present difficult information without drama. They had found a device under the vehicle. She would not describe it in detail, but she confirmed that the bomb disposal unit had been called, that the lot was closed, and that there was an active investigation. She said, "I can do that." She said they had identified a partial plate from a security camera lot that had captured someone matching B's description getting into a vehicle. 22 minutes before Ellsworth had come through the doors. She said they were following that lead. She looked at B when she finished speaking. "You gave us the right description at the right time," she said. That mattered. B held her hot chocolate with both hands. "The man didn't know I was there," she said. "I was sitting very still. Sometimes I sit very still and people don't notice me." "He didn't notice you," Constable Ashby agreed. "He should have," Bia said, not with pride but with something more like practical observation. People should look more. Ellsworth had 2 lawyers and a communications director and a personal assistant who had worked for him since the early days of Crane Capital, when the office was 1 floor above a Thai restaurant on 8th Avenue and the boardroom table had been a door on sawhorses. He called none of them that afternoon. He sat in the courthouse lobby until the police confirmed. The scene was clear enough for the Affinity to be towed. And then he arranged for Beatty to take a car service home. And then he called a taxi for himself, because the idea of getting into any vehicle that had been in that lot felt wrong in a way he could not entirely rationalize. He was not a superstitious man, but there are moments that shift the way a person occupies space for a while. And this was one, he thought, on the way home, about what Miriam had said about her mother's house, the drainage dispute, the care aide who came 5 days a week. The way Miriam had said her mother's affairs, with the particular tone of a person managing something that is both necessary and quietly exhausting. The tone of someone who hasn't been asked in a while, how they're holding up with all of it. He thought about Bia telling him the man should have looked more. People should look more. He could have let it go there. He had been in enough situations over 58 years to know that gratitude is its own transaction. A debt one can carry or not carry, depending on how one has decided to move through the world. He had known men who collected debts and men who dismissed them equally. And he had tried, mostly, to be the kind of man who did neither, who simply stayed present to what was in front of him and acted accordingly. What was in front of him was a woman with too much on her plate, a drainage dispute that was probably going to cost her money she didn't have, a mother with dementia in a house with inadequate infrastructure, and a daughter who had, without any obligation at all, saved his life. He did not call it gratitude. He did not call it anything. He just made some phone calls over the next 2 days. The first was to a property lawyer he knew, not one of his own firm's lawyers, but a woman named Rosalind Whitby, who had done excellent work for a charitable trust he sat on the board of, and who had a way of making city zoning disputes evaporate. Ellsworth explained the situation and asked what it would take to resolve it. Rosalind said she would look into it and call him back. She called back in 6 hours and said it was a straightforward matter that had been overcomplicated by a neighbor with a lawyer who had more time than sense. She said she could sort it in 3 weeks. He told her to do so and to send him the bill. The second call was to a contractor he had worked with on renovations for a community housing project in Forest Lawn. He asked whether the man did residential work as well. The contractor said he did. Ellsworth described the house in Inglewood, what he knew of it from Miriam's description, and said that if there was a drainage issue affecting the property, he wanted it properly assessed and fixed, not patched. The contractor said he could send someone out the following week for an inspection. He made a third call, which was the one he had thought about longer than the others. He called the long-term care facility in Bowness, not to speak to Miriam, but to inquire about the kind of care planning resources they offered for families managing a parent's early-stage dementia at home. He asked whether there was a coordination service that could help a family understand what was available to them, in-home support, RESP resources, that kind of thing. The administrator he spoke to was helpful. She mentioned that there was a navigator position at the facility, a social worker who helped families sort through exactly this kind of thing, and that the service was available to family members of anyone who had been a patient. Miriam's mother had been assessed there the previous spring. She qualified. He sent Miriam a letter, not an email. A letter, because some things are better said on paper, where they cannot be forwarded or screenshotted or misread in the way that digital messages invite being misread. He wrote that he had no interest in making their exchange into a story about what someone in his position could do for someone in hers. He wrote that he was aware of how those stories usually go and that he did not want to be that kind of person, or to make her feel like she had become a character in a narrative about his generosity. He wrote that he had simply tried to think about what she was managing and to direct some things in her direction that he had access to, and she did not. He included Rosalind Whitby's name and number, and the contractor's name, and the name of the social worker at the facility, and said that she was under no obligation to contact any of them. Then he wrote one more paragraph, which said, "Your daughter is one of the most observant people I have met at any age. She did not know who I was, or why it mattered, or what would happen if she spoke up. She spoke up anyway because she had seen something wrong, and she could not see a reason not to say so. I have been in business for 30 years, and I have sat across from a great many people who knew exactly who I was and chose not to say what they saw. The difference between those people and Bia is not intelligence or experience. It is simply honesty. Please tell her that from me, if it seems right to do so." He sealed the envelope and left it with his assistant to be sent. 3 weeks later, Rosalind Whitby called and said the drainage matter was resolved. She used the word fully, which was the word Ellsworth had asked her to aim for. He thanked her. A few days after that, the contractor sent an estimate for work on the Inglewood property, a proper drainage revision along the north side of the lot, new downspouts, and some foundation sealing that he said should have been done 15 years ago. Ellsworth approved the estimate. He did not hear from Miriam. He had not expected to, necessarily. The letter had said she was under no obligation, and he had meant it. He had sent it because there are things a person does not because they expect something back, but because the alternative, doing nothing, moving on, letting the infinity get towed, and the event become a story he told at dinners about a close call, felt like a small and insufficient response to what had actually happened. What had actually happened was this. A 7-year-old girl had been waiting alone in the rain on courthouse steps with a broken umbrella, watching the world the way she apparently always watched it, and she had been paying enough attention to see something wrong, and she had been brave enough to say so to a stranger, and that stranger had still very nearly walked past her. Ellsworth thought about that part quite often. He had been one step past her, one stride. She had said, "Excuse me," and he had stopped. But he had very nearly not stopped, and he knew it, and that knowledge lived in him now in the way that certain knowledge does, the kind that doesn't announce itself but is simply present in the background of ordinary days, altering the quality of attention you bring to things. He found himself stopping more, not dramatically, not in ways anyone would notice, but when someone spoke to him, he stopped what he was doing and looked at them. When he passed people on the street outside his building, he noted things. What they were wearing, whether they seemed comfortable in the weather, whether they were looking for something. It did not make him feel better about the world in any simple way, but it made him feel more honestly located in it, which was different. The letter came on a Wednesday in November, 7 weeks after the courthouse. It was addressed to him in handwriting he didn't recognize, and the return address was in Inglewood. He opened it at his desk. It was from Bia, not from Miriam. From Bia, in the handwriting of a child who was being careful, the letters formed with the particular deliberateness of someone young enough that cursive is still an act of concentration. She had written on 3-hole punched notebook paper, and the lines were slightly crooked but consistently so, as though she had made a decision about the angle early and committed to it. She wrote that her mother had told her what Ellsworth had done, though her mother had said he probably wouldn't want a big deal made of it. She wrote that the man had fixed things in the garden at her gran's house, and that her gran had stood at the kitchen window and watched the whole time, and then said it was good that someone was finally paying attention to the north side. She wrote that her mum had spoken to someone at the hospital about plans for her gran, and that her mum had cried a little on the way home, but said it was the good kind of crying. Then she wrote, in slightly larger letters, as though she had decided this part deserved more space. You stopped when I said excuse me. A lot of people don't stop. My mum says you almost didn't, but you did. I think that was the most important part, actually. Not the police or the car. Just that you stopped. Ellsworth read that part twice. Then he set the letter down on his desk, on the left side, where he kept the things that mattered. His father's photograph. A note from his daughter, written on a post-it, that said, "Good luck today, Dad," in her loose, hurried handwriting. From the morning of a board presentation 3 years ago, that had been the most frightening thing he had done professionally in a decade. The small things that turned out to be the only things. He did not write back to Bia that day. He sat with it for a while, the way it deserved to be sat with. Then, on the weekend, he wrote her a short reply on proper stationery, the kind with the crane watermark in the corner, and said that she was right. That stopping was the part that mattered, that he was glad he had. He told her he hoped she kept noticing things. He mailed it on the Monday, on his way into the office, which was something he hadn't done himself in years, stood at a postbox on a corner and actually put something in. It was cold, the way Calgary is cold in November, the kind of cold that clarifies things, that makes the air feel precise and honest, and without any pretense at all. He stood there for a moment after the letter was gone, his hand still over the slot. Then he turned and walked toward the office, and for once he looked at everything on the way.